man there, trying to stop Drogba getting himself into further trouble.
Oh, it's not a bad ball for Pele on the right side. It's Carlos Alberto. And what a great goal that was! Carlos Alberto.
Maradona just walked away from Huddle then. Maradona, Hope and Maradona! They're appealing for offside. The ball came back off the foot of Steve Hodge. And Maradona gives Argentina the lead. The England players protesting to the referee.
Ik heb opeens zo'n gevoel dat we in de halve finale gaan komen met het balbezit voor Frank de Boer. Frank de Boer speelt de bal heel goed naar Dennis Bergkamp. Dennis Bergkamp neemt de bal aan. Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Oh! Frank de Boer speelt de bal naar Dennis Bergkamp. Die neemt de bal feilloos aan en die schiet de bal erin.
So I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast this week by Tom from DNQ Did Not Qualify Football on YouTube. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I got you on because I wanted to talk a bit about the big football story of the week, which is, of course, the Oceania qualifiers. No Champions League. You know, this is the big story. But I wanted to, before we kind of get into that, maybe you want to briefly introduce yourself and also like what you do. What is DNQ Football and what do people go to your channel for?
Yeah, well, yeah, as I said, you know, thanks so much for kind of having me on. It's a bit of a kind of whirlwind one. I'm here in Doha at the moment, which is where like you say, the Oceania World Cup qualifiers are taking place. It's kind of New Zealand and the rest, as most people will sort of know it as a tournament. But yeah, probably about 6-7 months ago, me and my brother actually started DNQ Football. Did not qualify, as you've said, which is really just a YouTube channel, just 100% dedicated to kind of what we call like minnow nations. So sides that most people maybe haven't heard of or have only heard of in the capacity that they're not necessarily successful on the international scale. Obviously did not qualify. We came up with the name because it was, you know, what we're talking about ultimately, teams that have never qualified for their tournaments, you know, AFCON, the Euros, obviously the big one, the World Cup. And this kind of primarily centers around teams outside of the top 100 or so in the FIFA World Ranking. So I'm out here in Doha for the Oceania qualifiers because no teams from this region are in the top 100. And as I'm sure we'll get onto, one of the teams was even unranked. Yeah. But yeah, excited to chat things through with you, mate.
Yeah, exactly. If a team does break into, say, like one of these big teams that that you've covered, about maybe India or something like this, and they break into a top 100, do you have to decide that you're going to no longer cover them, or have you not? Is that a bridge that you'll cross when you come to it?
We're sort of having to half cross it now because a few months ago, probably at the turn of the year, I did just a very short video on Gambia, the head of the AFCON. And it was just Gambia, the lowest ranked team at AFCON. And it was just, just a short video. We're not the biggest YouTube channel in the world, so I put it out there. I thought it was a cool thing. They were 150th in the world and they got to the quarterfinals of AFCON, which meant that most of our fan base is now from the Gambia or from originally has heritage in Gambia. And now it's getting difficult. They're still outside the top 100. They're 125 now, but it is difficult because technically they did qualify. So it kind of goes against the name of the channel. Yeah,
exactly.
I think we have to kind of play it off because equally we look at New Zealand and they're not really a team that we cover much because for us, they're almost too good. But it's a really difficult one. You kind of have to kind of go off feel. Like everyone knows about New Zealand. I listened to one of your shows recently. We were talking about the 2010 World Cup, and New Zealand being unbeaten. And that people have seen this side. People know about this side. Everyone knows Chris Wood, Winston Reid. So you kind of just have to play it by ear a little bit. But in a weird way, we hope that these teams do kind of fall outside the remit of us being able to talk about them because that means that things are heading in the right direction.
On this show, we've basically become American Samoa ultras by a very which is why I'm rocking the
Looks
American
fantastic.
Samoan today, because from a very sort of navigational route, in that we watched the Next Goal Wins documentary.
yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it,
Mhm.
and sort of like fell in love with the team, and then we got Nicky Salapu, the goalkeeper from the American Samoan team, and he was kind of famous for being in goal when Australia scored 31 goals, to
Yeah.
come on the podcast and talk about his story and stuff like this. And I mean, I think it's a fascinating part of the football world, in that, I mean, for one thing, these countries play like three games every like 4 years
Yeah.
or something, basically.
Yeah.
But American Samoa and Samoa, they're not in this tournament, right? Because they're not. I mean, there's a lot of withdrawals with COVID and everything, right?
It's a really, really difficult one. So there's 11 FIFA teams in the region. Only 8 of them came to Doha to compete. So the 3 missing out, like you said, American Samoa, and the other one, which was due to play but had to drop out, was Tonga, because of their the natural disasters that kind of happened in that region. So they couldn't play, which is a real shame, because I'm actually a bit of a Tonga fanboy, just from like old school like World Cup games, like FIFA World Cup games.
Did you play the 2010 one where you sort of try and win the World Cup with San Marino one?
Exactly, that one. And you could that's my favorite game ever, because you could just flick the right analog stick and move around the globe. And
I remember it was
teams.
Amazing. I was like, why did none of the other, like it literally did have every single nation in the world.
It did. So that's kind of where we originally we didn't come up with the idea all the way back then, but we fell in love with these teams back then. And like you say, players like Salapu and things like that, like these people who are just normal people that live in these crazy places and have jobs. And even at this tournament now, all this time later, 2022, a lot of the players for these teams are part-time. They're fishermen, they work at their local shops and things like that. There's very few that are even semi-pro. So it's amazing, really. And I was disappointed to not see Tonga, obviously understandable reasons, and disappointed as well for American Samoa and Samoa, but just because of COVID stuff, they couldn't go. And that's the reason why the tournament's here in Doha as well, because no country in the region was willing to host it because of COVID.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll get onto why that's kind of ironic, I'm sure, because of everything that's happened here so far. But so 8 of the 11 split into 2 groups and playing the most games that they've, like you say, played since the last World Cup qualifiers.
Yeah, and exactly. And I mean, obviously, it's a shame, I think, that it's not taking place in the region. I mean, where it's originally normally played and stuff like this, but also it kind of gives the opportunity for these teams to play in these state-of-the-art. They're basically the World Cup stadiums, right? Like these stadiums which these players would never get the opportunity to play at.
I mean, I think one of them's a World Cup stadium, and the other one is probably as close to as it can be. These are plush stadiums, and the quality of pitch is. I had to actually ask one of the guys from the OFC. I was like, "Is that AstroTurf or is that actual grass?" Because it was just so pristine. And I mean, these players are not used to playing on this kind of quality surface at all, in their home regions. They kind of lost a little bit the advantage that they had over New Zealand in the.
I was going to say, get New Zealand on a bog field.
Exactly. Whereas here it hasn't been like that. So quality is just shining through, and some of the teams are a lot better than others, even though you might not sort of think it. The technical ability between different sides has been kind of really, really interesting to see. But they've got no leveler now against New Zealand, especially with Chris Wood and everyone turning up now.
Okay. So I presume the games are all, from what I've seen, the games are all taking place in. There's no crowds or anything, right? Does that make it feel weird when you're there?
I'm not really sure. It's so. At times, I'm just so in awe of the fact that I'm in Doha watching these teams from all the way around the world. But I think that there is an element to it that really the atmosphere is made by the benches and the representatives from these teams, like the Fiji New Caledonia game. At points you wouldn't know there was no crowd because the bench is from both teams and the kind of delegates from those nations.
I was watching one of the highlights of the New Zealand game, and you can hear. I mean, the bench. Also, something that you kind of got used to in COVID is you can pick up on the players swearing and stuff at each other, and then definitely hear that again.
And I think that's maybe made me kind of more accustomed to it, watching the Premier League and things like that with no crowd. You just kind of do get a bit more used to it. But I think for me, there's such a focus really on like the quality of teams that we're seeing, and actually, how good are they? Because you watch a highlights reel and it skews the vision slightly of how the teams actually get on. And it's been an incredible tournament. I mean, the COVID has hit big time a couple of teams and has kind of ruined Group A. So Group A was supposed to be the Solomon Islands, Tahiti, Vanuatu, and the Cook Islands. But both Vanuatu and the Cook Islands have had to pull out because the full squad has got COVID.
And where would they have been? Would Vanuatu have been looking to get out of the group? Because I know the Cook Islands were a complete unknown because they're, they don't even have a world ranking. But what about Vanuatu?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Cook Islands, they managed to get their first game in against the Solomons and lost 2-0, which they were celebrating as almost like a win because, they haven't played since 2015, actually, the Cook Islands. Vanuatu would have definitely looked to get out of that group. They'd have probably eyed up Tahiti as the side they'd have pipped to it. They've got some players that play for that region at a good level in like the New Zealand leagues. So they would have definitely been looking, and they didn't even get to play a game. So they've traveled all the way here and they didn't even get to kick a ball in the end. So, but it's interesting because they did play a pre-tournament friendly against Fiji and lost 3-0. So I don't know. It's strange. You always think on paper these sides should progress, but some of the club players and individuals don't quite perform at the same level when they're around everyone else.
Just thinking the climate is weeping at this tournament, but
I mean, it's obviously with the COVID stuff's kind of killed Group A, and now there's only 2 teams left, and only 2 teams go through. So they play each other.
So they're still
tomorrow.
playing the match, are they? Okay, they're playing tomorrow.
Yeah, it's really difficult because essentially they will both go through to the they'll both go through to the semi-final. This is almost like a quarterfinal, but they'll both go through, and effectively, the winner just avoids New Zealand in the semi-final, and then we'll obviously look to meet them in the final. So it is an important game for FIFA World Rankings, for confidence, just for playing more games as a squad. But equally, with everything COVID, I wouldn't have been surprised if OFC had have just sort of sacked off that game and just thought, let's just make sure, protect the players and get through to the semi-finals. And I think the only reason why they haven't done that is obviously because it would be a difficult decision about who goes through top. But secondly, because Tahiti haven't played a game yet. Yeah,
so it would look very odd for a team to play a team which has played, 3 group games already, whatever, wear and tear with that, and then their first game is in the semis. But how have New Zealand? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that's why it's difficult though for the teams in Group B, because Papua New Guinea or Fiji is going to go home, but they'd have played 3 games. Tahiti will play 1. And they could lose 10-0 and they'll still get through to the semi-final. So it is quite a difficult one from that stance.
And how New Zealand look? Because I mean, they only won the first game against Papua New Guinea with a relatively late goal. But I mean, their sort of issue has been, from what I've read, it's basically because it's taking place. It started outside the international window. Their squad is kind of coming in stages.
Yeah, so they've. I think today was the last day that they turned up. Actually, the last few players. So they were expecting to not have Chris Wood until today, but Newcastle released him slightly early. I think the way that Newcastle have been playing, they probably didn't need him. No disrespect to Chris Wood, but their first game against Papua New Guinea was always going to be the only game where I really thought there could be an upset here, because it was the weakest possible New Zealand side against a fresh and hungry Papua New Guinea. And Papua New Guinea are, it's difficult to say at this point, they could lose their next game and go home, but they're probably, from what I've seen, the second best side. They're probably the side that's going to look to get to the final. So they've got a centre-back, Alwyn Comalong, who, in fact, both centre-backs, the Comalong brothers, they both grew up and played most of their youth football in Germany. And you can just tell that they've just got that little bit more discipline to their game. They're a little bit more cultured. And if you have 2 good centre-backs at this tournament, it's worth its weight in gold, because most of the attacking players, whilst they're physical and quick, the ability, the technical ability and the football understanding isn't there as much. In that first game, Papua New Guinea could have easily got a draw. They don't have much of an attacking threat, and Winston Reid did play for New Zealand, which made it just easy. But that's the closest, in my opinion. I then watched, obviously, New Zealand 4, Fiji 0. that could have been any score, really. I don't know what the actual possession stat was, but it felt like at least like 75%
Okay.
to New Zealand. It was a battering. And to be honest, New Zealand now in the last game, the managers already said they're going to basically play their reserves because it doesn't matter against New Caledonia. They'll probably still pick up a win.
Caledonia they're already eliminated, right? I think
they're going home. Yeah, so they were pretty devastated and they kind of underperformed.
Okay.
But they lost to Fiji in the last minute and then lost to Papua New Guinea as well. So they're going home on 0 points, probably, provided they lose to New Zealand. Because of New Zealand's goal difference being +5, they're going to come top of the group. Even if Papua New Guinea win, it's unlikely that they wouldn't come top of the group, even if they lost. But this New Zealand team now, with Chris Wood, with Reid at the back, they've got a few players that maybe aren't known in the European leagues as much, but there's a defensive midfielder, Clayton Lewis, who's brilliant.
I think they have a couple of players who've joined from the League of Ireland as well. I think they came.
Have they?
Yeah.
In fact, yes, I'm pretty sure they do. And these are players who are still comfortably better than 99% of the players for the other teams. The best player, that Alwyn Comelong player that I was speaking about for Papua New Guinea, their best player, if I had to sort of map him to a level in the English football pyramid, he'd probably be a good League One player.
Okay.
And that just sort of compares, so he's a good player. He could be a professional player, but there's still a big difference between that and the players that New Zealand are rocking up with.
Yeah, like New Zealand's probably like lowest starting player would be at that relatively that level, right? And as an average, they're at that level, right?
Yeah.
Or
they would, for me, if New Zealand national team played in the championship, they would probably come low mid-table, which is, not a bad feat.
Yeah.
They've got a few. I mean, Winston Reid is still these games.
Yeah.
He doesn't get out of second gear. It's just easy for him. But across the board now, they've got a lot of just good players. I think that they will win this tournament, and then they get to the interconfederational playoff, and that's kind of where I'm just not sure if they can then get past that next stage.
I always get confused. Which continent are they playing? Is it they're playing against North America, right? I think this time.
Yeah, so this time around, this is the last World Cup where it will quite work like this, because next World Cup's the 48-team World Cup. But for this one, they've been paired against. So you get Asia, South America, North America, and Oceania all have a 0.5 at the end of their places.
Yeah.
But they've been drawn against what will be the fourth placed CONCACAF team, which is looking likely to be Panama.
Yeah.
Who
they definitely much prefer that than Chile they got last time, right? Which was a bit of a mismatch.
Everyone wants to avoid the South American team, which I think could still be Uruguay this time around, because there's some teams that have done really, really well. So, I mean, as long as you avoid South America, you're in a decent spot.
Then you're happy.
So I think Australia would have been the Asian team. I think.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's final yet, but I think that it's likely to be Australia. So you kind of see, you'll have, potentially a Chile or a Uruguay or someone like that. And then the other three teams being potentially Panama, Australia, New Zealand. You can see the difference there.
What do you think about the kind of debate around, New Zealand playing in this tournament where, people will say they're far too good for this, or like Australia said in the early 2000s that they should play that, and then they went to play in the Asian continent. Do you think there is, but I mean, also, I guess in the future, having a one guaranteed spot in the region will actually be in New Zealand's favor?
Yeah, I think for New Zealand, it's a difficult one, because these games, they're an interesting challenge. They have international friendlies against sides. Well, I think they've played Qatar semi-recently, Curacao, sides that are a decent level from all around the world. And then they have this tournament, and then these are the World Cup qualifiers, and these are the easiest games that New Zealand play. Yeah. So it's a strange kind of dynamic. But like I say, for the next set of World Cups, there'll be 1.5 places available to this region, which means that New Zealand will be in. And then, which I sort of get, and you look at it and you think, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But then New Zealand, it'll be interesting to see in the future. And I don't know if it'll happen, but with the expansion of the World Cup and then that region getting 1.5 places, is it too easy for New Zealand to get into the World Cup? And I think that's the question.
Probably, it feels like it would be almost a guaranteed every time.
yeah, you play 5 games and you're in the World Cup because you're New Zealand and you're playing against like Tonga and American Samoa, so it's difficult. And you think, but do they then move to Asia? Because is that fair? Or,
but I mean, then
do
it also
Australia come back?
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
But I think also people sometimes don't quite realize like how big these countries are in the Pacific. Like, I mean, we spoke to Paul Watson, who wrote a book about coaching football in Pompeii in Micronesia, and he said one of the challenges the biggest challenges of the region is that you have sort of islands which are, you think, okay, well, you could just nip over and play to the next island, but it's actually like 8,000 kilometers or something between them and stuff. But I mean, traditionally, what I thought is the Solomon Islands have been New Zealand's biggest challenge in the region. I know they took them to penalties in a few years ago. Was that right? Was that continental tournament?
Yeah, they've had lots of like small. The 2 biggest challenges for New Zealand tend to be Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. In various tournaments across the last however long. Those are the sides that pose the biggest threat. And when they play kind of intercontinental Pacific games and things like that, New Zealand normally send their under-23s for those kind of tournaments. But it is still a good barometer. They are still the size of the challenge. So the last Pacific games, to kind of put it into context, like how much these teams actually challenge. Tonga played the New Zealand under-23s and lost 14-0. So that kind of puts into perspective the fact that then if the Solomon Islands are 0-0 or 2-0, there's a huge golfing class there.
Yeah,
and I think Vanuatu also beat Tonga like 8-0 in that tournament. So there's big disparity. Solomon Islands futsal team is a decent futsal team, and Papua New Guinea have got a few decent players, but there's no team that across the board is good. And will compete with every player.
Yeah, I've seen those. I mean, I don't know if you've already seen those amazing pictures of like sort of football on the Solomon Islands, and you think, okay, like the Pacific, it's a rugby place, but I mean, there's like these huge like grass banks with loads of people there. So it kind of does. I mean, there is, the opportunity for football development there. It's just got to take time, and I guess, I mean, maybe with 1.5 World Cup qualifying from the region, that will kind of give more of a boost to like the rest of that is not New Zealand, right? That they have something they can actually kind of work towards.
Yeah, I was speaking to a guy from the OFC that's in charge of club development and things like that right across the region. And he was saying that already following the announcement there'd be 1.5 places, teams are starting to sort of buck up their ideas a little bit. Teams are starting to think, okay, let's build proper stadiums, let's get proper infrastructure, grassroots teams all the way up, because, okay, maybe not at the next World Cup, which is only 4 years away, but perhaps the one after. You're giving yourself, exactly. You're giving yourself that huge period of time, whether it's kind of 8, 10, 12 years to embed. If you've got players now that are like under 9s, under 10s, for those next World Cup, they'll be eligible to play, but you need to kind of start at that level. And also one thing they need to improve upon, and the kind of main barometer really in between World Cup qualifiers, is the winner of the OFC like Champions League. So the Champions League of that region does go to the Club World Cup, but in like the preliminary round. So they don't kind of ever get to that kind of finals that like the teams like the Liverpools and things like that get to. The big barometer will be if one of them can kind of beat like the Middle Eastern Champions League like winners and things like that. If one of them can kind of get at least past the first few kind of preliminary rounds through to getting close to that main Champions League, then maybe we'll see, okay, the club football's stepping up and maybe the international team as well, because that's got to be the foundation. I think with this region, more than any other, they have real limited ability to get players from Europe, get players from abroad. We see in the Caribbean, so many players now are actually based in Holland or France or England. The Haiti team all play pretty much in the French second division. Where, the Cook Islands, they don't have that. The Solomon Islands don't have that. They play in their own leagues predominantly. So the real challenge for them is it needs a whole big infrastructure boost. It needs a 10-year program. And then maybe one of these sides at the 2030 World Cup might pose a serious threat to someone else.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking back to this tournament, I mean, so the final is next Wednesday, and presuming it's New Zealand and another, who are you who you think is likely it's going to be, and do you think there's any? I mean, what percentage of chance of an upset do you think there will be?
I think that the side that would cause them the biggest trouble is Papua New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
The toughest thing about calling this is that New Zealand are the only team in the final. If Papua New Guinea could lose to Fiji if they get it wrong tactically. They played a high line against New Caledonia and they got lucky with a few slightly dodgy offside calls. Okay. Fiji have probably the quickest striker I've ever seen in the flesh. If they get the offside trap wrong, they could, and Krishna's a good player. If they somehow lose to Fiji, then I think it's just going to be so easy for New Zealand, because Papua New Guinea's defensive solidity is kind of what kept New Zealand at bay.
Yeah.
The Solomon Islands, I don't think could pose too much of a threat to New Zealand. I think it would be an entertaining game, but I think New Zealand would win it. But the biggest kind of question mark for me is, understandably, what on earth are Tahiti going to bring to this tournament? They've not played a game yet. They get through to at least the semis. They could be amazing. I doubt it, but they could be. But if I had to kind of put my neck on the line and pick a team, I would say the biggest threat to New Zealand would have to be Papua New Guinea at this point.
I hope if I mean, I have fond memories of Tahiti from that Confederations Cup tournament. With how many years ago it was against Spain, but I remember that they scored I think against Nigeria, and I think it was like 6-0 at the time. They made it 6-1, and they all brought out the canoe celebration. It was
2013 I think that was, which is, getting mad 9 years ago now. So a very different looking squad from them, but I don't know. I think I'd be surprised if the Solomon Islands didn't beat Tahiti in this game, and then you'll be looking at Tahiti, New Zealand semi-final, which New Zealand would probably win, and then the other one being potentially Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, which I think would then potentially be, really kind of the game of the tournament, because the New Zealand games, certainly from our point of view and our coverage, the New Zealand games are the games that people care about the least, because they just know that New Zealand are going to win it.
Yeah, it's a thing.
So I don't think they even really gear up. I mean, Chris Wood's just broken the all-time New Zealand scoring record with like 32 goals or something. But I've seen it from his stats that he scored 8 of those against the Solomon Islands. So again, it does skew it a little bit, doesn't it?
So maybe he's hoping that they reach the final.
Probably, yeah, he could get to double figures against them. But I mean, it's if a team were to cause them an upset, it would have to be Papua New Guinea, and it would have to be just a 0-0 and see how far you can hold them.
Oh, okay, cool. Are you sticking around until the final next week, or are you heading back?
Tomorrow is actually my last day, so I get to see the rest of the group games, and then I'm back. So I'll be watching the semi-finals and the finals from the sunny climes of the United Kingdom.
Nice.
So
who have you enjoyed? I mean, just around the tournament there. Who is it from the teams? Have you been able to speak to anybody in particular that you've kind of enjoyed speaking to, and they're just telling their stories around their football story?
Yeah, I mean, before the tournament, we managed to get a few quite cool interviews in. One of them was Alwyn Comalong, who's it's a really fascinating story for him coming from Germany, but also Toni Jankowski is another one as well, which is a name that most people won't kind of recognize potentially unless you're from kind of Switzerland or Germany. So he's the technical director for Fiji. So he's not the manager, he's the technical director looking at kind of the next generation of talent in Fiji and things like that. And he came on our show to kind of just talk about his project. He used to be assistant manager of Grasshopper Zurich in the Swiss league. And he's had various roles at various different clubs as well. And then he's taken on this kind of 5-year project now in Fiji to basically try and get them to the 2026 World Cup, or get them as close as possible. And hearing his story, and so we've been quite close with the Fiji camp. And speaking to them about, their squad, and it's difficult because they've got Krishna, who's the best player by a mile, and how do you use him in the team because he doesn't touch the ball much. But I think it's been amazing for them if anyone gets the chance to kind of watch their pre-match rituals, and if there's any footage or any content that comes out from their dressing rooms or anything like that. The togetherness of this side is crazy, and they are probably the story. There was a guy, Nabil Beg, who, whilst he was out here in Doha, turned 18. And it's just like, what an experience for these players that have never left the islands.
Yeah.
Which I know is the same for every team, but I feel like we've probably been closest to Fiji and their kind of story. Obviously, you know, primarily a rugby nation, but really trying to, their, you know, actual domestic league out there is big. It's a big league in the region. They're kind of football mad, and just like hearing about and learning about the kind of culture and everything that's different, and the kind of the ability that they've got physically is amazing. You know, they're all tall, powerful, quick, strong.
Yeah.
And if they do manage to get that kind of technical ability side, a little bit of that European kind of composure, and just added that in, I think that they'll be a side to watch in the future. But they've been an entertaining side to watch throughout this tournament as well.
Oh, cool. Well, I'll be tuning in for their game against Papua New Guinea tomorrow. I'm hoping they head on. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining me on the podcast. Where can people go to find out more? As I said?
Well, yeah, the number one place for us is on YouTube. So that's just DNQ Football on YouTube. We have got Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all that good stuff as well to kind of get the name out. But YouTube's the number one place. We got some really cool interviews coming up with loads of people, actually. So the tournament's kind of coming on from this. We've got the AFCON qualifiers, which are taking place today, and they're going ahead. Yeah. Then you've got the CONCACAF Nations League as well. So loads of interviews from loads of players from those regions, which is going to be awesome. Can't wait to get into it. But yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been really good fun. And yeah, all the best for the future, mate.
All right. Cheers, Tom. Have a good evening and enjoy the rest of your time in Doha.
Thanks, mate. Speak soon.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.